Hello. Yay. It is so lovely to see all of you here on this beautiful, beautiful Friday. So my name is Deborah, and I'm the director here at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. We could not, yeah. I love it. We really couldn't be happier than to be hosting and collaborating on this, what I consider to be incredibly important and historic event. And you are all here with us to open it and to be here and to think about who we are and who we want to be as an arts community in this country, which is extremely important work. So thank you for giving up your Friday, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow as well. Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, our mission is to generate culture that moves people. And by culture, we mean that broad set of things, the traditions and the stories and the beliefs and the values that people carry in their communities. And we think that it is culture that shifts things in this country. It's culture that instigates new policy. It's culture that precedes change. We also think that there are not enough people who are at the table. We need more and different kinds of people who are actually influencing the cultural shift. And it is arts institutions and artists that not only can, but must lead the way. So that's what this is about. We want to redefine what an arts center is. We are a citizen institution. We are not here to curate for the curators. We are here to make a difference in the world. And so it's going to take people like you to help us do that. We have a vision that the world is operating by being inspired. Everybody is inspired in our vision. So that's what REMAP is about. That's what ArtChangeUS is about. I am so thrilled to have you here. It's an honor to be working with Roberta Uno and her team. You are leaders. So thank you. Enjoy yourselves.
Hi. Good afternoon. Hi. My name is Mark Bamuti Joseph. I'm the Chief of Program and Pedagogy here at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. And I get to stand next to this fine-ass woman right here.
I'm Roberta Uno. I'm the Director of Arts in a Changing America, based at the California Institute of the Arts. And I've been a huge fan and collaborator of Mark Bamuti Joseph.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to objectify you. I just, you know, we can go right into all the mentorship, all the leadership, all the, starting off on a bad note. Welcome to ArtChangeUS REMAP. REMAP is a gathering of artists and change makers reframing the national arts conversation through the lens of demographic change and cultural equity. We are making visible innovative artistic work and forward-thinking arts practices while creating opportunities for artists, organizers, and thinkers to connect. Welcome also to California, the edge to a fault. White people are the minority in this state, but you never know it in San Francisco. Black folk make up less than 4% of this city's population.
Wow.
Latinos will make up half the state's population by 2060. Demographic change doesn't move in straight lines. It is, however, our belief that REMAP, that cultural visibility and expression is the closest indicator of the country we are becoming. And so we sustain a conversation that focuses on foregrounding a plurality of voices. At YBCA, we believe that you can learn a lot about somebody by the questions they're asking. So let me offer a few. What does a changing United States look like on the ground? How are arts and culture being expressed by people and communities across the country? What voices, ideas, and examples are leading the way towards the demographic shift? As we begin our gathering, these are the questions that REMAP is asking.
And I think that's ultimately what we're looking for, is that conversation that hasn't happened, those questions that haven't been asked. Arts in a Changing America is really not looking at demographics as a science, but really just as a metaphor, as a moment, as an opportunity for us to walk through, to look at what America really could be, to look at this project of potential democracy, potential pluralism, and to center the arts at the nexus of social justice. We all know, we're told, but we can see it, we can feel it. The energy at this REMAP has been amazing. People started in their artistic workshops. We've really centered it in culture and aesthetics and process. But this country, by the year 2050, will be like California or Texas or Hawaii or New Mexico or New York City, and more than half of the major metropolitan centers that are now, quote, majority minority, that very oxymoronic kind of term. 8,000 new Americans are appearing every day, whether that's through immigration or through being born here, and we're told that 90% of them are people of color. So this shift that is happening is not just a population shift. It's really rolling up from the next generation. By 2020, the nation's youth under 18 will have already made that shift. So, in contrast to that, if we pick up any newspaper or turn on the news, there's just a lot of demographic anxiety and hysteria and actually kind of vitriolic national positioning around who is an American at this point in time. So we're trying to reposition this conversation. We are not a counter-narrative, we are the narrative. And it's a narrative of cultural assets.
Amen.
So let's see. So ArtChangeUS is connecting us to leading practice across America through our core partners. We're kind of a different type of organizing project. Those of you who have met our team, my co-partner in this whole effort, you'll meet her later, Kristen Calhoun, our program director, and all the amazing volunteers and the staff that makes us up. But really, it's the 15 core partners who are kind of a brain trust and of meta-cultural organizers. So I want to just refer to this map, and first of all, thank our 4 Bay Area partners who have made REMAP possible. Not only Bamuti and Shanaka Hodge and Deborah Cullinan and the incredible staff of YBCA, but James Cass and his crew over at Youth Speaks, Jeff Chang and the amazing work at the Institute for Diversity in the Arts at Stanford University, and the amazing artist, visual artist, organizer, Fabiana Rodriguez, and Culture Strike.
Well, thank you. As we're dapping up the Bay Area, let's also take a look at the full positioning of the complement of 15 core partners, beginning in Hawaii with Vicky Holt Takamine at the Pa'i Foundation in Honolulu, the Citizen Engagement Laboratory in Oakland, California, the Alaska Learning Exchange, Teddy Cruz at the University of California at San Diego, Cal Arts, Maribel Alvarez in Tucson, Arizona, Maria Lopez de Leon of NALAC in San Antonio, Clyde Valentin, my homie, my stromy, SMU representing Brooklyn and Dallas, Texas, our friend Lori from the First People's Fund in South Dakota, the Minneapolis Learning Exchange, Carlton Turner, Fist Up to Alternate Roots in Atlanta, Georgia, Ann Pasternak, the new director of the Brooklyn Museum, Diana Taylor, and our great friend Polly Carl, who is the director of HowlRound in Boston, Massachusetts. If you could give all those people a pound. These are the individuals who are at the leading edge of transforming America, and your presence here, the embodiment of this moment, is proof that the network is growing. So thank you again for being a part of this family.
So we launched Arts in a Changing America in New York City in 2015. And we really do want to give a special thanks to Polly Carl and to HowlRound. Because of them, we also live stream the events. We're trying to keep our remaps to 200 people or less. You know, like 170 is our ideal, because we want people to have these smaller conversations that don't get to happen and have these kinds of experiential participatory workshops. But through HowlRound, we were seen by over 1,100 people in 19 countries in 22 states. Pretty amazing. And thank you. Yeah. Thank you, HowlRound. And they're live streaming today. They had sent us, Polly had sent me a note and said, you know, you should try to organize some live stream parties across the US. And actually sent out one email to, you know, I just tried to put together a list of organizations that I thought are also at this kind of leading edge of what is happening with cultural change. And I couldn't believe it. I got over 20 responses of organizations, including the National Endowment for the Arts, that wanted to hold live stream parties in their communities. So I don't know if the technology can help us go to just seeing some of the places where people are.
Our people, our people.
That's incredible. And we want to read out and give a shout out to some of these few representing the many.
Hey.
That's so beautiful.
See, now y'all still there, y'all still there. I know you can hear us. So shout out to the International Sonoran Desert Alliance in Ajo, Arizona, to the Alaska Native Heritage Center in Anchorage, to Alternate Roots in Atlanta, to the Theater Offensive in Boston, to our peoples in Detroit at the Charles Wright Museum. See that? See that? Fort Lauderdale, Sailboat Bend Artist Loft.
In Hilo, Hawaii, aloha kako to the East Hawaii Cultural Center. Knoxville, Tennessee, Linda Paris Bailey and the Carpetbag Theater. Our friends at the Miami Light Project and that amazing Beth Boone. In Minneapolis, the Cole Center for Dance and the Performing Arts. And
in New Orleans, Wole Ashe Cultural Arts Center. True that. Shout out to NOLA. In New York City, we have Art Space and Culture Hub. We have the Hemispheric Institute for Performance and Politics, my hemisexuals in the house, and the Park Avenue Armory.
And in Olympia, Washington, our friend Tina Kukan and the Longhouse. In Patchogue, New York, the Patchogue Art Space Lofts. And just a shout out to all those people who are working on artist affordable housing and affordable housing for everyone. In Philadelphia, the Asian Arts Initiative and the Mural Arts Project, and also in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, the City of Asylum.
Our neighbors to the south in San Jose, our peoples at Makla. In Seattle, the Wing Luke Museum. Further to the south in Valencia, our peoples at Cal Arts. In DC, the National Endowment for the Arts. And in Waukegan, Illinois, Karcher Art Space Lofts. Thank you for joining us. Hey.
Jason Schupak, thank you. Wow, it's so touching, right? To see everybody. That was just awesome.
Word up.
So why do we see this work as so critical? You know, as this country transforms from the ground up, and I think you could see that from the Skypes, you know, its institutions have largely remained the same, especially at the leadership level. So we want to change now to a New York Times photo collage that recently looked at the faces of American power. You know, the Oscars were really just symbolic of institutional shifts that just haven't occurred in every sector. And so this photo collage looks at over 500 of the most powerful people in American business, culture, education, and the government. And out of over 500, only 44 people of color are identified. So we're gonna roll this pretty quickly, but just look for the little yellow boxes to just get a sense of the difference between demographic America and its leaders. Presidents of Ivy League universities, still all white. Senators, executives who decide what movies are made, people who decide what music gets produced, mayors of the largest city, people who influence what books get read, people who can greenlight television shows.
Don't blink, don't blink.
People who decide what news gets covered, our Supreme Court justices,
And Clarence Thomas
our
don't count.
governors, top military advisors. And it ends with professional sports teams, which of course are overrepresented in players, right?
Can we move from this slide, please? This is my grandmother and my son. He is now a teenager, and she is now an ancestor. Born in Haiti dark, son of China brown. This picture is proof that I exist. The mouth she gave me, the nose I gave him. These are faces of American power. They represent the resilience of a bloodline across borders and hegemony. This is the skin in the game. The cultural advance towards equity isn't just a moral pursuit, it is the promissory note. It is the least I could do to honor the woman who left her homeland to make a space for her family here. It is the least I could do to make it safe for the being that I brought into this mess. And even in the grotesque visage of American exceptionalism, these are the faces that give me strength. Old, woman, immigrant, black, young, boy, Californian, Taiwanese, Haitian. I'm here to put that on the map. We are here in service to the previously trod path, to walk our steps as they did in our power.
We have one other photo. I chose a photo family too. And because of my Bay Area roots, this is my Uncle Edison Uno, who was one of the founders of San Francisco State because of the organizing there. SF State in the house? All right. And this is my grandfather. My grandfather changed his name to George after George Washington. He decided to come to the United States for religious freedom. He had converted to Christianity, and he came almost 100 years ago. And learned impeccable English, and named all his 10 children, gave them American names too. And the America that he found made him ineligible to be a citizen, to own land, to intermarry with a Caucasian, or to vote to change any of those laws. And shortly after Pearl Harbor, he was picked up by the FBI and was held till a year after V-Day, the end of World War II. He is among the longest held internees of Japanese American ancestry. And you know, I start with this story because my grandfather was an immigrant who lived through a cataclysmic era. He and my family were racially profiled. They were incarcerated without due process or charges. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. You know, we are living in another similar parallel time of increasing global instability, racial profiling, and a polarizing and vitriolic discourse about who can be an American. So it's important to acknowledge that the US, this browning that's happened, is because the US was legally constructed as a white country.
America was maintained as majority Caucasian by law. This only changed after civil rights legislation, which is now currently under siege, and the Immigration and Naturalization Act that have catalyzed the browning of America. So we are looking at an emerging United States, and REMAP is a place where these voices and conversations can be heard.
So we're going to transition now to another core partner. I'd like to introduce Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and filmmaker Jose Antonio Vargas. And I just want to say that he's someone I dearly love and greatly admire for his courage, because he's somebody who always goes there. I mean, he is going to spaces where we're actually not wanted or welcome, whether it's the work he does on Fox News as a progressive pundit, whether it's going to all 50 states, which he has, going to all of the caucuses, creating an immigrant film festival at the Iowa caucus, making the film White People for MTV, and going into conversations around the country about the construction of whiteness and what that is. So we're going to start with a video of his and then welcome Jose Antonio Vargas.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
5 years ago, I took the biggest risk of my life.
My guest tonight is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who recently admitted he is an illegal immigrant.
Last year, I made a film called White People.
There's already outrage from some corners over a new MTV documentary that the network says takes a look at white people.
In 2016, I want to talk about us, all of us. So this is actually the U.S. Census form. Like, what do you check?
White. I don't like that.
It makes us
seem like we're all the same people.
Yeah.
The majority of new Americans are coming out of Latina pussies, but the identity of what it means to be a Latina is largely up for grabs right now.
There's a lot of common misperceptions, stereotypes, and racism associated with dating as an Asian man. I teach specifically Asian men how to date girls.
Sometimes they're calling me the homo cholo just because of my look.
This used to be a black gay club, but it's now a parking lot. So there's really not going to be a spot for the gay people of color.
Today it was 100 degrees in the fields and there's people picking fruit. And people on top of that demean them. That's not right. And those are good immigrants.
Well, I didn't come from a privileged background. The first house that I can remember living in was 2 rooms, and the bathroom was outside. White privilege, I'm not buying it.
Race is the third rail because comedy has become segregated.
Arab Americans have no one to really look up to that's in the media. Being an actor, every single role for Middle Eastern was terrorist.
We're literally changing the face of what civil rights looks like.
We are the founders of #BlackLivesMatter.
I identify in a lot of different ways.
I identify as
Korean
American Jew.
I identify as being Arab. I identify as American.
In the past few years, I've realized that a new chapter in American history has begun. The minority is becoming the majority. And together, we are remaking the mainstream.
Hi. I'm timing myself. Good afternoon. It's really wonderful to be here. This is a homecoming of sorts for me. I am a very proud product of the Bay Area. I was born in the Philippines, and my mom sent me here when I was 12 to America, and she sent me to Mountain View, which is, not too far from here. So I was actually in Mountain View in 1993 before Google got there, so way before Google got there. I am also a very proud graduate of San Francisco State University. And I'm a former reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle, which is 3 blocks from here. The offices of the Chronicle's 3 blocks from here. This is also a homecoming because of people like Roberta Uno, Yosemar Reyes, my dear friend Yosemar Reyes, who's here, and Jeff Chang. He and I just had an intense conversation backstage for like 30 minutes. You know, Roberta, Yosemar, and Jeff, to me, feel like home because what they do, the way they do it, the way they own their space and create space is the kind of home I aspire to build for myself as a journalist, as a filmmaker, as a human being, as a global citizen. I may not be a citizen of this country technically, but I know, as we all are, that we are global citizens and the world doesn't need passports for us to travel around. I don't need papers to exist in this world. And this is a homecoming because of the deep connection between ArtChangeUS and #EmergingUs, which is what you just saw. This is a new digital platform, a media company I just started to tell the stories of the emerging America. I'm also proud to report that in the media ecosystem in which people of color don't own anything, not a lot, this is the first media property to be owned by an undocumented immigrant and one of the few to be owned by a person of color who also happens to be gay. ArtChangeUS and #EmergingUs are partners. We share a mission documenting the demographic earthquake, and it is an earthquake that we are all living through, and we use the same tools of storytelling, and we share a vision of a changing and emerging America that is truly inclusive. As far as I'm concerned, we are the stories we tell. We are the stories we tell. Yet when it comes to the stories that the media tell about us, when it comes to the arts that should reflect the realities of our daily lives, there is a tremendous and unacceptable imbalance. The emerging us, especially here in the Bay Area, the first minority-majority region in the United States, the emerging us is more multi-ethnic, more immigrant, more colorful than ever before. The emerging us in California is not only black and white, although, you know, East Coast media people seem to think that America is mostly black and white. It's also Latino, it's Asian, it's Native American, it's Middle Eastern, it's mixed race. As you probably all know, 51% of all Latinos in California, 51% of all Californians aged 25 and under is Latino. 51%. And you know, California gives people, didn't we give people like yoga and soy milk? Right, and almond milk, whatever starts in California spreads all across the country. This emerging us is more intertwined than ever. Our lives and the issues that we live with, immigrant rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, Black Lives Matter, income inequality among all races, they're all intersecting with one another, resisting to be categorized and simplified in one box. So the trailer that you just saw for Emerging Us, I would dare all of us to try to find those stories on CNN or on HBO or in the Washington Post or in the New York Times. When I was trying to fundraise for this new project, I showed it to quite a few venture capitalists here in the Bay. I'm not going to name them to save them. One of them actually said to me, "This is a little too gay." I don't know, isn't the country a little too gay? A venture capitalist who happens to be Asian American said to me, can you just stick to immigrants? Do you really have to talk about Black Lives Matter? That's a little too controversial. We can't talk about immigration and not talk about race. We can't talk about, you know, race and not talk about what's happening in our own communities, the anti-Blackness that is pervasive in the Asian and the Latino community in this country. So how do we have all of these conversations at once? The reality is this country is only going to get gayer. The country is only going to get gayer, blacker, browner, more Asian. Women of all ethnic and racial backgrounds will continue and must break every possible barrier there is to break. So what's left? Straight white men. Somebody asked me the other day in Washington, D.C., what's at stake in this election? I would argue that what's at stake in this election and what's at stake in this country, and I'm saying this in the most respectful way I possibly can, what's at stake is the soul of white heterosexual men. How much change can they handle? Are they willing to give up space? Are they willing to actually realize that the very people that created the laws and founded the institutions now have to make room for a truly inclusive emerging America that is not going to go backwards? That is a question that faces the arts. That's a question that absolutely faces journalism. That's a question that faces all forms of media. The reality is the emerging us is here, and we are the one who make this country great. Not only that, the emerging us are the ones who will insist that this country lives up to its promise of a more perfect union. So as Roberta asked me to speak today, I started thinking, I actually have 3 propositions. Here's the first proposition. We are living at a time, James Baldwin is probably smiling up there. We are living at a time in this country in which the other in America is now all of us. Why is that? Because now I have done maybe more than 600 events all across this country, as much as possible, do Tea Party, conservative, Republican events in Nebraska and Ohio and Alabama and Mississippi, all those places. What I've realized is in this country, white people feel that they are othered. They feel under attack. Not all white people, but the many white people that I talk to. And what's fascinating about this is white people, for the first time, are an emerging racial minority across the country. In 2014, in the school year in American public schools, for the first time from K to 12 across the country, white students are in the minority. For the first time. So what does that look like? When we talk about diversity, how do we include white people in the conversation? Because you know what happens sometimes, right? People of color talk about white people behind their backs. So how do we do that now in front of them? How do we actually now have and insist on more uncomfortable conversations about race and privilege and class in this country? As I said, I was a reporter at the Chronicle. Actually, this was in 2003. 2003 was when the Bay Area became the first minority-majority region in the country. Like any person of color at the Chronicle, now mind you, the Chronicle, we're living in a city with the largest Asian population, majority Asian in the country, right? Yet at the Chronicle at the time, I think there were maybe 5 of us who were Asian reporters. They put all the people of color reporters in one pod. We were supposed to cover diversity. And so when this study came out from Stanford about how the Bay Area is minority-majority, I went to the white city editor, Eric Matthews, and I said, I want to write about white people being the minority. What? Well, isn't that the reality now? Thankfully, there's a white student in Oakley who wanted to start a Caucasian club at our high school. Perfect. Interviewed her. Went to Independence High School in San Jose, right, where white students are in the minority. 12% of the high school, 3,800 students. 12% are white, and they all hung out in room D12. And they played water polo. This was in 2003. In some ways, the series that I did for the Chronicle actually was the precursor for a documentary I made for MTV called White People, in which I went around the country talking to young white people about what it means to be young and white in a country that's getting less and less white. And this young white woman in the film said, well, to be white is the default. It's the norm. It's the standard, she said. There's a black woman sitting next to her who kept looking at me and going like, And then I started looking at this young white woman and I said, oh my God, what a burden that must be to think you're the norm and you're the standard and you're the default. And what happens when you realize that you're not? What happens when you realize that white people actually are in the minority around the world, right? Then what? I would propose that we are now at a time in this country in which we should resist calling ourselves the minority, because we are not. I would propose that we are living through a state of transition, and immigrants are at the heart of this transition. In the next 50 years in this country, mostly Latinos and Asians will make up 88% of the total US population growth. In the next 50 years, 88% of the total population growth is going to come from mostly Latinos and Asians. But when they say that this country is founded by immigrants and it's a nation of immigrants, we can't talk about America being a country of immigrants without acknowledging the struggle of Black Americans and Native Americans in this country. We cannot emphasize our commonality without first confronting what makes our experiences different. What laws were created that made them different? The survival of this emerging America requires that we see each other more fully and more humanely. I made a film called Documented. It's on Netflix if you want to check it out. We had a screening in University of Minnesota a few months ago, and this African-American student, a law student, got up and said, Jose, I'm really conflicted about this. Of course I want you to be a U.S. citizen. You've been working really hard, to get citizenship. I feel conflicted because I'm born here. My ancestors are from here. We helped build this country. But sometimes I don't feel like I'm treated as a citizen because I'm black. Then a month later, at a screening again, and another screening in South Carolina, this elderly black woman came to me. I guess she saw me on like Rachel Maddow, and she said, I just thought it was really interesting that you say that your life is subjected and limited by pieces of papers. Because my great-great-great-grandmother got here, when she landed in South Carolina, she was given a piece of paper, it's called a bill of sale, saying that she's a slave. So can you connect the papers that you can't seem to get to the papers that she was given? And here we are, stuck talking about walls and talking about Mexico, as if, I don't know, didn't Mexico used to own parts of the United States? Talking about all these very simplistic issues, and the media just goes ahead and runs with it. And this is why being here for me is important. This is why Roberta is doing to me is crucial. At such a political and partisan and divided time, we need more than ever artists, writers, journalists, poets. We need all of the artists, all of our artists, to do something that has never been done in this country, to tell the fuller story of America. Politicians are not going to do that. They're too busy trying to get elected to divide us, right? The only people who will do that are artists. Artists always lead the way as to where we are going, transcending politics and speaking to people. The poets, a quote from James Baldwin, the poets are the only people who know the truth about us. All of us. I actually met Roberta and Yosemar around the same time. I don't know if you remember this, Yosemar. I met you at an artist retreat at Sundance in 2012. It was kind of this intense time. It was all these people of color in one place. It was like, what is this thing? And it was really intense. And I started reading James Baldwin when I was a freshman in high school, Notes of a Native Son, Mountain View High School. I really don't know what I would have done as an illegal faggot in America, which is what people call us, if I hadn't read him. And then there's this poem that I want to read now. This is something that I read to myself every day. And I actually dedicate it to all of us who are trying to make these changes. This work is hard. Getting grounded is hard. Trying to make sure that we actually take care of each other is hard. So I think this is, to me, relevant to all of us. This is the poem from Baldwin. Some days worry, some days glad, some days more than make you mad. Some days more than shine when you see what's coming on down the line. Some days you say, oh, not me, never. Some days you say, bless God, forever. Some days you say, curse God and die. And the day comes when you wrestle with that lie. Some days tussled, and some days groan, and some days don't even leave a bone. Some days you hassle all alone. I don't know, sister, what I'm saying, nor do no man if he don't be praying. I know that love is the only answer, and the tightrope lover the only dancer. When the lover come off the rope today, the net which holds him is how we pray, and not to gods unknown, but to each other. The falling mortal is our brother. Some days leave, some days grieve, some days you almost don't believe. Some days believe you, some days don't. Some days believe you and you won't. Some days worry, some days mad, some days more than make you glad. Some days more than shine. Witnesses, we are all witnesses, coming on down the line. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Jose. That was wonderful. So I'm Kristen Adele Calhoun. I'm your interlocutor. In lieu of a Q&A with the audience, thank you. I will come out after each one of our presenters for this portion and ask them a couple of questions. So Jose, that poem was wonderful from Baldwin. Thank you for sharing that. my first question is this. I follow you on Twitter, and you're actually one of my Twitter heroes because of the way that you handle the trolls and also the way that you elevate the conversation around immigration. And last night you tweeted, I believe you said that over 4 million New Yorkers, or 4 million immigrants call New York their home, which is over 22%.
Those are legal U.S. naturalized immigrants. 4 million. Yeah.
So we know there's even more immigrants than that in New York State, and yet there was no mention of it during the Democratic debate, which was in New York yesterday. So my question to you is, how does that change? If our stories are necessary in order to create empathy, how do we make something like that change?
Oh man, I have to tell you, when we look back at this time, I think we in the media, particularly in the news media, are directly responsible for the level of misinformation and inaccuracy and silence that is happening all across the country to immigrants. The fact that here you are in New York, right? They're having the debate in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And not a single question during that entire debate was about immigration.
It's crazy.
It's unacceptable, journalistically criminal and irresponsible. But you know, it doesn't matter, right? CNN, I remember, one thing that I forgot to mention. American newsrooms now across the country are less diverse than when I started in journalism in 1999.
Wow.
There are less people of color reporting in newsrooms across the country. In this country, we've elected the first black president, yet the Washington Post has not had a person of color be the editor. Wow. The New Yorker, GQ, all of the major magazines, all of the East Coast media elite that frames the narrative and tells our stories, there's never been a person of color in charge of them.
Wow.
And look, Univision and Telemundo, I'm happy for them. I'm glad that Essence and all these magazines exist, but we have to be in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the media, we're not at all.
Right on. Thank you for that. My other question for you is this. There's so much fear as this majority-minority shift is happening. What's your advice to white people as they become the minority, as someone who's been a part of the minority population your whole life?
I gotta tell you, by the way, so White People, which was a partnership between Define American and MTV, we just got nominated for an Emmy, so wish us luck.
Congratulations. That's
thank
wonderful.
You. It's on YouTube for free, thanks to MTV. It's only 42 minutes long. It got criticized when it got out. Thankfully, my grandmother, my Lola, gave me really thick skin, so I can handle criticism. It was fascinating because Rush Limbaugh hated it. Mm-hmm. So the amount of death threats and emails I got from white people saying, "How dare you make us feel guilty?" Was pretty crazy, right? But on the opposite side were all my progressive friends, white and people of color, who were like, "What are you doing? Like, you're too easy on white people." Apparently I was like white-splaining or something. And I'm telling my own progressive friends, clearly you haven't spent time in Alabama and Ohio.
That's right.
And so I was pushing my own friends saying, wait a second. By the way, and this is to all of us, you know, especially in this time that we're living in, how many people do we talk to who don't agree with us? How many people are we friends with who challenge our view of the world and how we think of it? This is so important, right? And I did not anticipate, because, you know, I was spoiled. I grew up in the Bay Area, right? I did not anticipate the amount of fragility that is out there. That all of a sudden, and you know, for me, thankfully, my blessing here as a journalist is I'm trained to listen, right? So I care less about what you think than why you think the way you think. It's the easiest thing to do is call somebody racist or homophobic or sexist. The harder thing to do is try to figure out how did they get there, right? And I would argue that for white people, I think Alicia Garza said this in a speech a few months ago, only white people can end racism, right? And this is gonna require a conversation. And by the way, when we talk about this is not liberal conservative, this is all of us, right? Like, how are we going to be willing to have these uncomfortable but necessary conversations about privilege? So for me, white people, one of our jobs there is, people of color always get asked where we're from. I think it's about time that we ask white people where they're from. Where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid? If you can't answer those questions, you have no right to obsess over a border that you don't understand and call people illegal. Where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid?
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Give it up one more time. now we have 4 respondents to Jose's call. They're all based in California. They all represent different sectors. And the first one is someone who intimately understands this place that we're in right now, San Francisco. He's somebody who's been working for arts equity for a long time. Please join me in welcoming Tom DeCaney, the Director of Cultural Affairs for the San Francisco Arts Commission.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to San Francisco. And if you live here, welcome to the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. It's such an honor to be here for this conversation and this convening. I'm the Director of Cultural Affairs for the City and County of San Francisco, where I direct the San Francisco Arts Commission, which is the city agency that champions the arts as essential to daily life. We do a number of things at the Arts Commission, but I wanted today to kind of set the context of the Bay Area, and particularly in San Francisco, and talk a little bit about government and policy and how it is that we can all take action to ensure that the arts are essential to our daily lives, but that they can also be a vehicle for justice and for moving ourselves forward to a better America. So, and for those of you who are watching us live stream, we hope you come visit San Francisco sometime soon. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic climate because we can't be in San Francisco today and not talk about the economic environment we're in. We are living in a city right now in San Francisco that has an average median income for a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, 600 square feet, $3,600 a month in South to Market. So if you're not from the Bay Area, we are one of the highest priced housing markets in the United States, and we are competing to be one of the most high-priced housing markets in the entire globe. We have to talk about the economics and the environment we're in if we want to talk about equity. It's not just happening in San Francisco. What happens here, as has often been the case, is happening elsewhere, but is a precursor for things to come. I was honored this year to represent San Francisco along with New York City and Los Angeles at the World Cities Culture Forum in London. We are 3 U.S. cities among 32 global centers that are living through one of the most radical demographic and economic shifts globally we've ever seen. London, for instance, to give you an example, has lost 1/3 of all of their music venues in the last 3 years alone. So we're at an unprecedented moment where we have to be taking action collectively, individually, as governments, as private foundations, as artists, and as arts workers to ensure that culture thrives in our cities. It's a demographic shift in terms of economics as well as racial and other demographics. So what can we do? I want to talk a little bit about some of the successes we've seen in San Francisco, because one of the amazing things that brought me to San Francisco is a long history of progressive activism, organizing by artists and other people to ensure that government is responsive to these challenges. Given that this is a global context, obviously we're not working against local forces. We have to be thinking globally and acting locally. So I want to tell the story of the Cultural Equity Endowment. One of the amazing programs at the San Francisco Arts Commission, which is about to have its 20-year anniversary, is the Cultural Equity Endowment. This is an ordinance. Yes, someone's going to applaud. We should applaud. For people who don't know about the Cultural Equity Endowment, it was founded because a bunch of artists in 1995-96 organized to kind of put forward a fight at City Hall in San Francisco to say, enough is enough. We want to see a resource allocation of public funds dedicated to artists of color, organizations run by artists of color, LGBT and women organizations. They took that fight to the Board of Supervisors and got past the Cultural Equity Endowment. I'm thrilled to say that after 19 years of a flat budget of $1.9 million, Mayor Lee, for the first time ever in its history, gave an unprecedented 50% increase to the Cultural Equity Endowment, which is now a $3 million fund supporting individual artists and arts organizations in communities of color, LGBT, and women-run organizations. I say this story because it goes to show what collective action can actually result in, what can actually happen if we take action, and if we ensure that government is accountable for ensuring the equity in our communities. There are so many examples in which collective response can change government response. It was mentioned earlier the kind of state of politics in our country, and I think it's complicated, to say the least. But in San Francisco, we're very fortunate to have a predominantly progressive elected body, primarily people of color, both in our Board of Supervisors and with our mayor. And so when people act, there is a response, but I think we have to define the need for arts and culture so people really understand that in the collective need we're facing as a city, because it's not just artists that can't afford that $3,600 a month, one-bedroom apartment. It's teachers, it's early child care workers, it's all of our allies in this fight to ensure that cities can remain an affordable place for everyone, including artists. So one of my biggest challenges is ensuring that when we talk about the arts, we don't create a frame that the arts are separate from the collective needs of communities and that we really are embedded in the work. And unfortunately, I think we have established as a sector a bit of a challenge for ourselves, and that we define ourselves as a profession, but I think it's because as artists and arts workers, it is so personal to us, it is part of our identity. So there's a real call for telling the story of what it is the value proposition is for arts and culture in terms of government response. So as we work at the San Francisco Arts Commission to ensure affordable artist housing exists in San Francisco, to date, government in San Francisco has not been able to create affordable artist housing. But Mayor Lee, in his budget speech this year, gave the first directive to the Arts Commission, the Mayor's Office of Housing, and the Office of Community Investment and Infrastructure to have a plan on his desk this year for affordable artist housing. It's been surprisingly complicated in engaging communities of color in San Francisco to tell the story of why that is essential that we have artist housing. And it's because they have struggled for so long to have affordable housing themselves. In San Francisco, we've sadly seen one of the greatest outmigrations of the African American community in any US city in history. We have to be able to tell the story of how artists are embedded in communities and are improving the quality of life for everyone. And we're so lucky in San Francisco and the Bay Area because that happens every day. We're seeing, despite great odds, the resilience of artist communities to organize and take action in the Mission, in the Western Addition, in Oakland, and throughout the Bay Area. And it leads me to my next point, which is about a pathway to ownership. One of the greatest opportunities we see is the ability for us to take back ownership in communities of color, in artist communities, and for too long we've let other people own space for us. It is certainly a challenge. We have to build our financial literacy skills. We have to empower people to have a better sense of what a pathway to ownership looks like, and we have to invest wisely. So I want to talk about a really great program that's emerged here in San Francisco in a response to this affordability crisis, the Community Arts Stabilization Trust, otherwise known as CAST. CAST was founded 2 years ago with a very generous contribution seed grant from the Kenneth Rainin Foundation to establish a program, a holding company, if you will, of real estate for small and mid-sized organizations to be able to find a pathway to ownership over 7 to 10 years. So 2 great early successes was that early seed grant from Rainin and other private philanthropic support and some public funding. They were able to acquire 2 arts buildings in San Francisco's Central Market, a neighborhood that's been facing very radical change given the in-migration of tech workers and tech companies that has helped increase the price of commercial real estate. In California, there is no rent control on commercial real estate, posing a great barrier for government to enforce affordability and help advance affordability in our neighborhoods. But CAST came in and bought those buildings at a very opportune moment and is working with the 2 tenant organizations so that they can buy them back over a 7 to 10 year period, therefore replenishing the trust. So they have helped find a permanent home for Counterpulse at 80 Turk Street in the Tenderloin in a former, yes, let's give a round of applause. Counterpulse has been a long-standing organization in Central Market that serves a broad number of communities, but came really out of the LGBTQ performing arts community in South Market. The other building is the luggage store at 6th and Market. An incredible visual arts organization that is so deeply rooted and embedded in communities. If you walk around the Tenderloin and Central Market with Daryl or Lori or any member of Luggage Store, you can see firsthand how incredibly connected these organizations are to the neighborhood and how essential it is that we provide them a pathway of permanent ownership. This is a model, I believe firmly, that is very exciting for government because we can make a contribution to that pathway to ownership without it going onto a city balance sheet. So I can testify that it is a very exciting model for our budget director who is facing great deferred maintenance on city assets across the city. all sorts of buildings that have historical needs and that during the last recession had been quite under-resourced. So it's a public-private partnership that's essential, and I really want to put a call out to other communities that may not be facing the same affordability challenges, but we need to be thinking 20 and 30 years ahead. That day-to-day art making is essential, but we also have to start to build the literacy skills, the financial literacy skills, and the capitalization in our communities so that we can take ownership and get out of these primary markets and global capital forces. So we have to be organized, we have to be thinking about that pathway to ownership, and we have to be fighting for control of space, physical space for art making, for communities to come together. And this is, I think, a model that goes into, just generally speaking, some of the tragedies we've seen in US cities through errors in redevelopment efforts. And we need to be able to better empower people to have a sense of ownership so that when we're not just looking at placemaking, but we're establishing placekeeping for people who've been in neighborhoods to make those neighborhoods what they are for so long. So with that, I think there's a few questions coming my way, but.
That was wonderful. Thank you for that. And I also want to thank you for your fierceness in fighting for cultural equity and that you've been one of the warriors working on that for so long. So first, I want to say thank you. My first question is kind of a personal one. I'm curious for people like you who are working on this from the inside out, from on the government side, how do you sustain yourself? How do you keep going when I'm sure you come up against a lot of different obstacles?
Well, I think for me, it's a lot about the partnerships and the amazing people I get to work with every day in communities. So I appreciate your thanking me and the Arts Commission for our work on cultural equity, but what is so true is that it's really by and of the community that benefits from it. And it's so true that every day when we have people coming in and receiving funds, especially with this new historic increase, I think what's fulfilling and rejuvenating is to see the resiliency and the innovation happening and the sense of community. I think of a model for that community ownership, a local artist, performance artist and drag artist, Juanita Moore, who has founded Juanita's List, which is just an online listserv in the queer community and for artists to kind of find and give each other opportunities to access housing or to access other resources. So I just am so, I think, invigorated by what a great opportunity we see when people organize and when they're able to use technology to do that well.
Awesome, wonderful. And there at the end, you mentioned the term placemaking. And before I was working with Arts in a Changing America, I was in philanthropy. And we hear so much in philanthropy right now about placemaking, but you also said the term placekeeping. What's your advice to philanthropies and other people working in government entities around the country in order to make that placekeeping a reality as we're seeing artists being displaced from our cities?
I think we need to make allies with experts in land use policy. We need to see more people of color as urban planners. We need to help post-secondary institutions encourage people of color to get into urban planning and people with an artistic focus to get into urban planning. And we have to better understand land use policy. I'm going to give an example, I think, of placekeeping in a way that's really a wonderful success. The community organized on 24th Street in the Mission to form the Calle 24 Latino Cultural District 2 years ago. Our Board of Supervisors designated the geography of 24th Street from Potrero to Mission Street as a cultural district. There was an initial allocation of resources for mural preservation and some other community efforts in the arts. But as a piece of trailer legislation, a really exciting land use policy, the mayor, along with Supervisor David Campos, co-sponsored a piece of legislation to form a special use district, which is land use policy terms for geographic zoning space, to prevent two small parcels from joining. So I'm going to tell you why this is important.
Yeah.
As we all get to enter more and more wonderful restaurants and bars that have Edison light bulbs and raw wood, as exciting as that is, I personally would like to live in a world that isn't all repurposed wood and Edison light bulbs.
Right on.
So we saw restaurants wanting to access small parcels and combine them together.
We see that in New York too.
And restaurants benefit from those larger parcels.
Yeah.
By preventing any two parcels of a certain size from joining in this special use district legislation, it will keep small businesses in small spaces that'll definitely keep the neighborhood identity. So those are the types of land use policies that I think we have to be better at mastering in arts and culture to make sure that placekeeping is really possible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. Y'all give it up for Tom DeCaney one more time. So keeping on this issue of space, we're gonna go to another contested space, which is the border. Please join me in welcoming from UCSD, we have political theorist Fona Foreman and architect Teddy Cruz.
Yes. Hello. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Roberta. Thanks, Roberta, for inviting us to be part of REMAP and to the Yerba Buena Art Center for hosting us. Fona Foreman is a political theorist. I'm an architect, as was mentioned, and our practice is what we call an embedded practice, inscribed in a unique geography of conflict, which is not too far from here, the San Diego-Tijuana border. And we see it many times as a global microcosm from which to, in fact, confront many of the pressing problems that are affecting cities everywhere. Obviously, I'm referring to urban asymmetry, socioeconomic inequality, territorial militarization and surveillance, migratory flows, the changing demographics and informal urbanization, and the very neoliberal political economy of urban growth that has polarized private and public interest. And why not to say it has, in fact, produced political disengagement and civic apathy. In fact, we zoom in into border neighborhoods and marginalized communities on both sides of the border, and our work is embedded in, for example, the first immigrant neighborhood into the United States, San Isidro, from which we question the impact of immigration and the transformation of the American neighborhood. And in the south, the last slum of Latin America crashing literally against the United States, from which we notice how informal settlements in Tijuana build themselves with the waste of San Diego. Recently, we've been questioning that it is in fact from these bottom-up cross-border urban flows from which we could question and problematize the very notion of citizenship.
So we've been looking for more inclusive ideas of citizenship, more inclusive ideas of the city, and we found this in many cities across Latin America. Take Bogota, Colombia, for example. This was Bogota in the 1990s. City racked with violence, poverty, police repression, complete urban breakdown, no sense of civic organization whatsoever. Many people call Bogota at this moment the most dangerous city on the planet. When philosopher Antanas Mockus became mayor in 1995, he took a different tack. No more guns, no more tanks, no more law and order. Instead, he came with clowns and placards and an idea about how to change the hearts of citizens and to help them recognize and value each other again, to regain an urban collective identity. Among his first acts in office was this. He distributed a placard with a thumb that could be flipped either thumbs up or thumbs down, and everybody had them. And as they moved through the city, they would use this when somebody did something that was pro-social and made you feel good. You gave them a thumbs up. And when they did something that violated your sense of urban dignity, from urinating to whatever, you held a thumbs down. And everybody laughed and thought this was crazy. He was a little crazy. But what happened is people began to look at each other again. And they began to realize that my behavior actually has an effect on other people, and other people's behavior has an effect on me. And subtly, people began to think together, what sort of city do we want to live in? And what was born from this, and what became the basis of so many of Antanas' interventions that followed, was a new citizenship culture.
In essence, the lessons of Antanas are amazing for us, and we wanted just to share 3 provocations. He was basically fundamental in sending a message for arts and culture producers that before transforming the city physically, we first must transform social norms, social behaviors, that fighting violence cannot be done or achieved only with police repression, but in fact with community processes, engaging a renewed sense of urban pedagogy. And finally, he gave a relevant role for activating arts and culture as agents for civic engagement and community participation.
So we went to Bogota, and we convinced Antanas to come to the border with us to help us open up a more inclusive idea of citizenship in our region, a unifying concept rather than the divisive way that citizenship is too often deployed in the US and our region in particular as a wall to separate and divide, to separate out what's mine, what's yours. And together with Antanas, we designed the Binational Citizenship Culture Survey, working with the mayor's offices on both sides of the border and a cross-sector group of stakeholders. Antanas deploys surveys like this in cities across Latin America. And it's essentially designed to assess 2 things. On the one hand, public trust, which is a kind of vertical relation between publics and institutions of various kinds, and what we might think as horizontal relations within civil society, the capacities for cities to self-organize. So what the survey does is it becomes a diagnostic tool to expose the city's, or in our case, the region's civic vulnerabilities, but also opportunities for creative intervention. And this is precisely, obviously what we are aspiring to do in our practice at the border, how we as cultural producers can disrupt the mythologies of public opinion that have been perpetuated by xenophobic, often racially motivated fears about the other, and facilitate a new conversation between institutions of power who collaborated in this project and diverse communities on both sides of the border.
And we don't have time, obviously, to share with you some of the results. We're, in fact, in the process of packaging and narrativizing and visualizing them. But the main aspiration that came out of the project is to open the provocation. Is there a cross-border citizen whose notion of belonging is not defined by the arbitrary political borders or, in fact, by the identitarian politics of the nation-state, and instead is really defined by the shared values, shared practices and aspirations between these 2 divided cities. So inspired by Antanas's also message that art, in fact, could be a performative and a cognitive tool to access complexity, and in collaboration with Roberta Uno, a few years ago, we curated a performance right at the juncture between an 85,000 people slum, the border wall, and the estuary and environmental zone on the US side. And we requested permission from Homeland Security to insert a forum inside their jurisdiction very close to the newly built border wall, but also we requested an unprecedented permit. Can we cross the border through a newly built drain by Homeland Security, transforming it into a 24-hour official port of entry from San Diego into Tijuana, so that the audience could, in fact, experience the interdependence between the estuary and the 85,000 people slum. Homeland Security told us they would go for it only if Mexican immigration was waiting for us on the south end of the tunnel to stamp our passports. And as people were there filling out the paperwork and stamping their passports, they could witness the sewer and the contamination coming from the slum into the estuary. In essence, this catapulted our question to connect Tijuana, San Diego with other thresholds, other political checkpoints, geographies of conflict across the world, and we found out that Tijuana, San Diego is in the same corridor, connecting itself with some of the most intensive checkpoints in the world, including Ceuta and Melilla, which is in fact the most emblematic funnel of migration from North Africa into Europe and the Israeli-Palestinian border, the most iconic checkpoint in the Middle East. This is what we call the political equator between the 30 to 35th degrees north parallel. Finally, it is from here which, in fact, we begin to press the question, how to rethink citizenship and the changing relations between identity and the territory. That is a defining question of our age. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teddy and Pona. So somewhere in the middle there, I saw a slide that said that the survey was the script for intervention. So I'm really curious about how do you take that data and how do you use that script to create change? How do you elevate it so that things begin to change in the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually the most important part of it for us. I mean, the data is quantitative and very thick, and it doesn't communicate very well. And for us, it was always meant to open itself up somehow through translation, through narrative, through visualization, as a mirror of self-knowledge for a region, and particularly two cities that don't talk very much to each other. So who are we together? This document can do a very good job at showing that, but that's just the beginning.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. I'm gonna bring you guys downstage as they get set up for this next thing that's coming along. But I'm really struck that Antanas Mokus had the foresight to bring the arts into this conversation about how do we shape a city, and that he was willing to learn from clowns and signs and from artists. So my question is, what can we as artists learn from him? And what can we also learn from this binational mode of operating or practice?
I think that ultimately it's really fantastic that he clearly calls on artists to intervene into conflict, but really intervene by producing a sense of facilitation between the top-down and the bottom-up. In a sense, I think more and more we realize that a lot of these projects are really presenting a new model of engagement between institutions and communities. I think very, very few people are actually tackling that relationship between top-down and the bottom-up. But also, once you locate that into a very specific geography of conflict, like the border region, artists immediately, I think, would have to be confronted by the immediacy of the physicalization of conflict in the territory, by really experiencing this, these two divided cities. So I would say that the major sort of lesson or aspiration that emerges from here is to remind all of us as artists that conflict itself, the visualization of conflict, can be a creative tool to begin a process of engagement, but also that art might not be located in the object itself, but in the relationships between objects, the kinds of circulations, distributions, the kinds of power relations that construct those objects. So artists might begin to enter into a new form of practice where social relations need to be reorganized. And that, I think, is a fundamental lesson.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Give it up one more time for Teddy Cruz and Pona Foreman. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our last respondent is someone who really understands the power of personal narrative. When we see a lot of times that personal narrative isn't really valued when you're talking about change happening. This is somebody who has used his own personal experiences to create art. So please join me in welcoming musician, educator, poet, actor, Dalak Brathwaite.
According to my own moral code, I got like, I don't know, A-. All right, fuck it, B+. 8, 9 out of 10 times, I'm probably doing the right thing. I think the law inherently acknowledges that you can't enforce every rule all the time, that eventually the consistent code breakers will get caught. And then there's an allowance for most of us almost kind of good people. there's no allowance for us almost kind of good people to be in the right. And I have been in the right, on the right-hand side of the road so many times for the wrong reasons. The first time, a cop told me I'd driven through the parking lot of a movie theater too many times. The second time, I made it inside the movie theater, but the best fight scene actually happened even before the movie started. It was like two Chinese families who literally fought their way to the exit and left all the brothers just sitting there saying, quote, "Damn!" It wasn't us. The third time, a cop car followed my Solara through the streets for like 10 minutes, pulled me over, checked my license, and when I checked out, he said he couldn't see whether I changed my tags or not. Those tags are color-coded for that particular reason. You couldn't see? I don't think you should be walking around with a gun, player. You can't see. I mean, are you colorblind? Clearly not. The fourth time. I'm crossing the street, and this parked cop car flashes its high beams at me. It's awkward, so I'm inclined to wave hi, at least. I keep walking, and the car just speeds towards me and then just drives off like it was a bluff, like I would run first and wonder what I was guilty for later. Well, I might. The fifth time, I am parked at the park, and 50 parks behind me, points the camcorder at me, so I kind of just pose. Till the pose get all the info they need, I'm told to leave. Notified that I've been registered in a gang-affiliated database. I'm like, great. I thought I had to sign up for that one. The sixth time, I get a police escort from closing club to my parked car. He got his arm out the window just staring at a brother. I mean, I dressed up to get looked at, but this is not what I had in mind. The seventh time, I am around the corner from my house. That's it, that's all that happened. The eighth time, I spent the first hours of 2006 outside my house, lying face down, Oscar Grant style, under an infrared police gun, nervously pointed down. The ninth time, I am dragged by neck off the steps of a Las Vegas hotel. And the 10th time,
Flashy.
Now I was seeing flashy lights till them lights flashed on my flashy car. As soon as I passed my headlight, dead with your vice. Then it made me wanna stop like a bright and gas light. I stop like the lights red, they shine they flashlights. I'm like, that's right. Oh, can't you see my skin is light red? I know I ain't that hard to see at night, but still I'm at fry. Can only get 3/5 of my right for 5/5 of my black life. How am I not supposed to be scared? My people either pushed over the edge or pulled over the curb, thrown on the hood, face put to the floor. Are you or have you been on probation before? Cause I'm black, right? I don't know, but I know I wouldn't even have to ask if I passed as white. There are 2 programs afforded to us first time, nonviolent drug offenders. One of them can wipe this completely from my record. I didn't get that one. The other first time, nonviolent drug offenders who plead no contest to the offense get sent to a treatment center. And at best, your charges get dismissed, but not deleted. Forgive, but don't forget. It's like the lover who took you back after you cheated and then bringing it up every night. What's the fucking point? Until I die, I'll always be like black, like male, like felon. No words before felon, no adjectives before the word felon can make it any better. For real, like you old creative writing workshop teaching felon. Toni Morrison reading, middle class. Elton John listening as felon. College graduating, decent credit rating having, backpack rapping, square ass glasses wearing, poetry playwriting, young black male felon. Sounds like an insult. I've been sent to this center, a treatment center. Hi, my name is Dalak, and I'm not an addict. Oh, no, I'm a good nigga. If we gonna put labels on it, you know, I'm a good nigga. You know, like I recycle and shit. I'm a good nigga. I mean, this is what I managed to gather from the Ross, Phoebes, Chandlers of the world who might have thought of it a compliment to say, I like black people like you, or you're one of the good ones, which my Rosetta Stone for racism translated into you're a good nigga. I didn't mind it. I actually kind of liked it. It kind of made me proud. Being a good one was kind of like being a nigga. Black folks could say it to me endearingly. Like, hey, nigga, you one of the good ones. You one of the good ones. Everybody else didn't say it out loud. If I was trying to prove anything to anyone, it was to my crew, to my peers, that I could be down without letting the man hold me here. I always got this feeling like I was born with the strike already, that through goodness I could receive penitence, forgiveness for a sin not my own. And yeah, you know, I am good and bright and qualified and polite. I'm nonviolent. I got a pretty good outlook on life. I smile a lot. My teeth are bright. They think I'm cute. My nose just right. My lips just big enough. Just big enough. What's up? You like? What it do? Are you in the mood for a little bit of taboo? I mean, I do like check off, and you like to check off your to-do. I am the desire without the fear. I'm safe. I'm trustworthy. You need diversity in the workplace? Great. I need a career. I'm just playing the games with the tokens given. I'm already Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Here's your golden ticket, a fix for your fixation, your methadone prescription, Starbucks equivalent to your fantasy addiction, your guiltless pleasure, your diet soda, your fat-free loaf, your coke-free crack, your Barack Obama. You voted for him, right? You didn't even know he was black. I'm the element of surprise, the black-white elephant in the room, the beauty and the pain of Ella Fitzgerald's tune. I naturally channel the channel your television assumes. It suits me fine, fuck what you tell it to do. I'm the talented 10th and a 10th of 11%. It's so few, so few, so few. Thank you, y'all.
That was dope.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good job. So you mentioned that you teach these creative writing workshops, and I know that you've been touring this work too. So first of all, where have you gone?
So far, we've done San Francisco.
Right on.
We did Hawaii. We did DC, and I just got done with a tour that went to Arizona, Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Philadelphia.
Iowa, wow, okay, that's kind of unexpected.
Yeah.
So when you go to these places that are kind of in the past demographically, they're not in the future, like California, which has already done this majority-minority shift, what are some of the, do these stories resonate in those places? And what are some of the surprises you're finding in those places?
So I think Cedar Rapids, Iowa is kind of like a good, you know, like, place to start off because I felt being there, I was somewhat exotic, you know, like not just being black, but one being black, hip hop with this type of story, with a story that seems like an autobiography, that seems very personal. It felt, all of those combined were just, I think, a little too much for the average Cedar Rapids citizen to kind of like, what's going on?
Yeah.
They put me on the news. I was on the Channel 7 News for doing a workshop. It was like, well, this is something we haven't seen ever before. Hip-hop artists in the classroom. And I was like, no, if you come to the Bay Area, you know, there's a whole organization that does this thing, you know.
Which is what? Which organization?
Which is You Speak.
Right on. That's
woo,
it.
Woo, 20-year
You
anniversary.
Speaks.
Right on, right on. And so it was kind of, it was a trip to, like, I felt like, not in a bad way, but I felt in some way kind of a prize, kind of a, in Philadelphia, I felt like the story stood alone, whether it came from a personal narrative or whether I just been creative with this. I think when I was in Cedar Rapids, it felt like they could only imagine this through one being a true story, and two, like they couldn't, I think being creative with our personal narratives adds an extra authority that I don't think, at least in Cedar Rapids or some of the less, you know, diverse cities in America, I don't, it's almost like I didn't feel like I had the authority to tell this story without it being a personal narrative, without it coming actually from my body. And you know, the effort to be creative with such a personal narrative demands a certain authority with it, demands a certain authority over it, and that was just one level I don't think Cedar Rapids could see for me.
Yeah. So real quickly, because we're out of time, but I want you to say just a little bit about your personal pedagogy in these workshops that you've been doing around the country and why that's a part of your personal practice, if you can sum it up real fast.
Yeah, I got you. So basically the workshops is teaching writers to confront their shame, confront what's embarrassing, confront what they've never told anybody. And like I was saying before, make it creative. Start to have authority over it so it's not existing as this shadowy narrative that's been given to you, but you actually control the narrative by taking it out of your body and starting to be creative with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'll give it up one more time for Galak. So if we can please give another round of applause to all 4 of our wonderful California-based respondents. Thank you. So while we're switching over to this next segment, I just wanted to take a moment to thank our funders and partners. The work that we do wouldn't be possible without our institutional home, the California Institute of the Arts. So give it up for Cal Arts. And then Citizens Engagement Lab is our fiscal sponsor, our accelerator. They provide our office back end, and they are an amazing partner. I would also like to thank the Rasmussen Foundation, the San Francisco Arts Commission, the San Francisco Foundation, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, Unbound Philanthropy, the McKnight Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, Nathan Cummins, and last but not least, the Ford Foundation. So thank you for making what we do possible. So as Roberta and I were planning this day and talking about the emerging US, whose country is it? Whose city is this? This recurring theme that comes up all around the US, and we just saw it in Dalak's work, is this issue of surveillance and police profiling. So the next brother that I'm about to bring out is gonna guide us through a conversation around that with people from around the country who are making art about that issue, who are creating policy to deal with those issues. Please join me in welcoming Carlton Turner, who is an ArtChangeUS core partner. He is the executive director of Alternate Roots, which is an arts, give it up for Alternate Roots. It's an arts and social justice organization that serves 13 South and Southeast states. He is also a writer, a performer. He's the co-founder, co-artistic director of Mugabe, which is a performing arts collective in Mississippi. So again, I'm gonna call this brother out, Carlton Turner. Thank you for guiding us through this conversation.
How y'all doing this evening? Good evening, my name is Carlton Turner. I'm the executive director of Alternate Roots, as Kristen just said, where we are battling the Confederate Spring. Maybe you all have heard about what's happening in North Carolina, Mississippi. I am from Mississippi, and to let you know that we are actively engaged in resistance at all times. So know that there are a bunch of freedom fighters and warriors that are down there doing the work to really battle these backwards issues that we've got going on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about fusion centers. We're going to talk about high-tech racial profiling. We're going to talk about stingray interceptors and surveillance of activists, Black Lives Matter, COINTELPRO, police brutality, militarization of our police forces, and how all these things are impacted by the changing demographics. I'm not going to talk a long time because it seems like we're already running out of time. I want to get the panelists out here.